God, there's so much snow. It feels like I don't even know what it feels like. Just like something crazy, like not normal. Like, look at the amount of snow. Hello, it's book time. So I have my coffee. Okay, so the next book was The Last Garden in England by Julia Kelly. It actually came out in 2021, so like January 5th, I think, like in the beginning of the year. So one of the newer books that came out that I snatched up and read. I actually had placed a hold on the library, and I was the first person on hold the day it came out. So I literally read it like that first week that it came out, and I actually really enjoyed it. I did drop the reading to about 3.5 stars only because of the ending. Like, I know, like, I usually rate a lot of it depending on the ending, because if the ending seems rushed or there's something missing or we don't get closure, that automatically just like kills the whole story for me. So for The Last Garden in England, we follow 3 different viewpoints. Like, in general, I feel like the books that are coming out now really have a trend. They're all like based on like multiple viewpoints, multiple storylines, following multiple years. It can get very confusing if you're writing it really wrong. This one, however, was written pretty well, kind of similar to The Vanishing Half, similar to The Sundown Motel, where everything kind of comes together and you learn a little bit more each time. And about each character, you kind of get closure in one of the storylines from the previous storyline. We follow 3 characters. We follow Venetia, we follow Beth, and then we follow Emma. They're all about 40 years apart, I would say, except maybe between Beth and Emma it was more. So Venetia was like 1907, Beth was 1944 during World War II, and Emma is the present moment, so it was written like 2021, which was interesting to read because like the date would be like September 2021 and you're like, wait, whoa, we're still like in January 2021. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Wait, but it was like interesting to read that. So this is like more of like a historical fiction book because a lot of the stuff was based on facts. It was like the land and how land was taken away from people and like during the war. It was like in a mansion again, Highbury House, and the owners wanted to build a garden, and then in the present day the owner wanted to rebuild the first garden that was created. And it mostly focuses, I would say, on the Winter Garden, which is the one that like had a lot of history that happened in it. So I don't want to like give anything away, but yeah, like everything kind of focuses more with the Winter Garden because each woman kind of left a little piece of herself in that garden. However, I would say for Beth, Stella was kind of like the most person that was in the storyline. That's what felt kind of weird. Like, I mean, it wasn't problematic, but it didn't feel like Beth really had anything to do with that storyline. It just felt like she was there uncovering or like part of the storyline. I feel like Stella, the girl who was working in the Highbury house in the kitchen, she was the one that was like the main plot because she was the most involved with the whole storyline of that year. But it's okay, you know, the author had a vision and that's how it came to be. I wish there was like a map though in the beginning of the book so that we could actually track the garden, because the way that it was explained, there was like so much going on in that garden. There was like plants there, plants over there. There's like a path leading to a different garden. There was like a lot of land there. So I wish like we had some sort of map that we could just visually see, because somebody who doesn't know plants at all, like, I don't understand. You know, I need to know what flower you're talking about, where is it, what other flower is it next to. I know like the book kind of like makes it a point to like talk about like the restoration, like the characters were trying to restore the garden a lot of the times, but it never really focused on it. It was mostly like the main characters were always like focused on something else, or so to say someone else. But the interesting thing is that Venetia's chapters are all written in first person, so she's writing it as a diary format, but all of the other ones are speaking in third person. So that's what like made the story a little bit interesting. Definitely, like, you know, not your typical story where usually that chapter of the character is in first person. Like the ending, I really liked the ending, but however, I did feel like kind of wrapped up a little bit too fast. Emma was the person that kind of tied all the stories together, found out the answers, but it was kind of like unrealistic how she figured it all out, or how like her and Sydney and the other characters in her timeline all just figure out within 5 minutes by looking at like the family map. Kind of was unrealistic, and it was kind of like a matter of fact kind of thing, like, oh yeah, so and so, yeah, okay, and let's move on to the ending chapter. That's how it kind of felt. I feel like that's what made me kind of drop the star, like I mentioned, but I mean, overall it was like a really beautiful story and I did enjoy it. Yeah, it was like really interesting. Like, again, historical fiction is definitely like a favorite of mine because it touches really like true facts. You get to learn a little bit about, you know, somebody that never really liked history in school, so it's like a way for me to like learn a little bit more about it, like the world now, you know, at that point in time. The next book that I read was called Detransition Baby. I categorize it as LGBT book, also fiction, but like I'm really sad to say that I had to give it only 2 stars because like I just completely did not like the writing style at all. It was also kind of viewpoints in different chapters. It was like really jumping back and forth, but the way that it was jumping back and forth was just like so confusing. So let me just backtrack a little bit. The book is about 3 characters. 2 are the main ones, so Reese and Amy, or also known as Ames. And then there's also Katrina that Ames is currently seeing, and she gets pregnant with his child. So I don't like, there's not really like one main character that we follow in the whole story. It's kind of like all of them together. Specifically more so Reese and Amy, or Ames. So Reese was seeing Amy, who then detransitioned and then became Ames. So in this book, we kind of navigate their lives with their stories. So we navigate Reese's lives, we navigate Ames' life in each moment, and how he was and who he became and why he became who he is today. So I feel like it's even hard for me to explain about this book because I was just like so confused, and I still am like really confused because the book was written like, let's say Ames was heading to a shop with this other guy, and in one of the chapters he's like waiting, then all of a sudden it skips to talk about like something in his past. Then the next chapter is when they're in the shop, and then talks about something like, again, for multiple pages about like his life, and then the next chapter they're back in the car driving to the shop. So it was like super choppy. It was like not like very like linear, I would say. I would say like this whole book was more like about their character, inner feelings, their life exploration. They're trying to like figure out who they are, learn about themselves and their sexuality. So it was not like a really plot-driven novel. So if you're looking for more action, this is definitely not the book for you. And then the situation where Katrina becomes pregnant with Ames' child, it's not really the main event in the book, from which like in the description you would assume. It's mostly just like a moment captured in time that we kind of count from. So the chapter beginning usually tells you like 6 weeks pre-conception or 6 weeks after conception. So like you kind of know like what point in time we're learning and reading about. So besides the writing style, I did enjoy discovering new facts. This is definitely like a topic that, you know, I'm not very familiar with, and I've read books in the past about it. Definitely like a good thing to do and to learn about it and to learn more about the characters, their feelings and stuff. But the writing just like really kind of, I wasn't really following the writing. I just couldn't figure it out. Like a lot of adjectives and analogies that were unnecessary. The characters were very complex. So this book was definitely like a little bit more on the depressing side, and it was quite a heavy read. So I would definitely like suggest to pick this book up if you're in a good space, that you just read something light. I wouldn't recommend reading it straight after another heavy book, because it'll be a lot of emotions. The characters carry a lot of baggage with them. So like overall, if you are really interested in reading this book, definitely like I would not like, I mean, I always recommend every book no matter if I liked it or not. Just read it, check it out for yourself, but just know that you're getting into a really heavy book that you may not understand at first. So I would suggest kind of reading it a little bit slower, perhaps, which I kind of didn't do. I kind of tried to like rush through it a little bit, which I say was kind of like my fault, but I think it was because I got lost in the storyline. That's why I kind of had to do that. So yeah, but if I would go back, I would kind of make sure to ease in a little bit into it. Okay, my next book, this one was a really heavy read, and I think it was my fault at the way that I read it. I read it right after I read Detransition Baby, which was also a heavy read. But you know, it was my library. I just got the book, so I just had to take it or pass it, and the wait times are long, so I just went with it. So the book is called The Prophets. It's by Robert Jones Jr. It was part of the Book of the Month. And it just came out this year, in the beginning of the year. This book it's super important to read. It talks about slavery, and it's in Georgia, set in Georgia, talks about slavery and how two slaves are like in a forbidden union, that they're in love. However, I felt that part got lost. It's a super beautiful story, like the whole plot line, like it's super good, super important, but I felt like it just got lost because of the amount of viewpoints point of views were in the story was just a lot. It was like every single character on that plantation almost had like a chapter, so you never really got to learn deep about a character. It was just like kind of like flat. You're just like barely scratching the surface of that character's life and emotions and feelings. So I felt like that's what lacked, and I felt like the whole beginning part with Samuel and Isaiah, it would have been like perfect. It was just like if we were following just them two, so we would build and learn more about them, about their lives, go really deep into it. But that just didn't happen, or I just didn't understand. Like I just couldn't sometimes grasp the moments with the amount of point of views that were in the book and the amount of biblical references that were there too. Some of the chapters I didn't understand at all, that were talking more about the biblical sense. So it's definitely like my own fault too. It's definitely nothing on the writer. So I would say if you're going into this book, make sure you have some sort of knowledge, or you have to Google what it means as you're reading it, because it can be hard to understand. So I do want to revisit this book when I am a little bit older, I learn a little bit more, I have more knowledge, and to reread it again, because my goal was to give 5 stars to this book because of the whole storyline and what it means to read. You know, I really wanted to give 5 stars to this book, but just due to my own knowledge, I had to only give 3 stars because I couldn't really get into the book to fully support it. I do wish there was more dialogue in this book and more of the experiences on the plantation from the characters' perspectives, rather than just like kind of, it was really awkward at times because it felt like they were just like scratching the little bit of the surface, like describing some part, but they never went into what they were actually experiencing and how they felt on there. on the plantation in full. Like, again, this is a very important book to read because it is part of our history, it is part of our history that we have to learn and we have to know about. But make sure you have a full understanding of the book, and if you don't be discouraged, just revisit it again in a later time and just be prepared for some difficult moments in the story. The next book that I read was Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. So the author is Emmanuel Aiko. I know I'm probably pronouncing every single name wrong, but I am really sorry for that. Anyway, and again, this was like my third heavy book that had a really important and deep topic in a row. So I feel like it really kind of like fried my brain out completely, that I think you should definitely not do that, and I know I shouldn't do that, but again, library books. The ebook just came through, it was like all like in a row like that, so I just had to take it. Or go back into the line and wait like another 4 weeks for the book. So I just decided to take it. This was not a really long book, so it's possible to read it in about a day or two, but I mean, don't rush through your books is what I learned, because you can miss a lot of the stuff that you read if you are like really rushing through the story. So the Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, from my understanding, this was like part of a podcast or podcast format and then written into a book. Really important to read it. It came out in 2020, the end of 2020, so it touches COVID subjects too, and everything that happened in June with the protests and stuff in the United States and around the world. I would say, like, I don't really want to like go deep into this book, only because it's like also a nonfiction book. So nonfiction books are like sometimes really hard to read because they kind of like explore like real life, so you can't like judge somebody's, you know, story life about, you know, with a star rating. But this book is super important. I did learn a lot. It had a lot of historical context too, which I feel like is really good for us to know. I never went to a high school in the United States, so I didn't have the initial like knowledge of any of the historical stuff that happened here in the United States regarding race and stuff. So to me, it was very important to learn about it. So just long story short, I do think this is a very good book to read and should be added to your reading list. And the next book is called Horrorstor. It is by Grady Hendrix. This is like the weirdest book kind of I read ever, and I don't even know why I picked it up. It wasn't kind of like on my priority reading list, but I did see on Goodreads somebody read it and I just picked it up. I just like searched for it in the library ebook section and it was available, so I just like took it while I was waiting for my other books to come through. It wasn't a really long book, and it's like a horror thriller, kind of fantasy, I would say too. It was like so weird. Like honestly, like I gave it 4 stars. I don't know, because it was like really engaged in the story, honestly. It was like so weird. So the main character is Amy. She's one of the employees at this like kind of like an IKEA kind of store, like furniture, and it's like supposedly really huge, and there's stuff that happens at night in the store, like furniture breaking, like smeared furniture too with like stuff on it. And the manager needs to know, or like the supervisor needs to know what's going on because the higher ups are coming to investigate. So 3 of them decide to stay over the night shift to figure out what's going on. And oh boy, they're in for like a really wild night. So there's, I don't want to like give a lot away, but it was just like so wild. It was like, I think like in that moment, honestly, like as I'm sitting and talking about it, in that moment I kind of rated it 4 stars, but in a way I probably dropped the rating down to a 3, only because some of the parts didn't really make sense. There's like a lot of questions that were kind of left unanswered and didn't really make sense. Like it didn't make sense, and like I know it's like categorized as a horror, but it's not really horror like in full, because you're not really sitting there in anxiety, like panicking for the characters' lives. Kind of like in the Sundown Motel when you're sitting there reading about them and you're like freaking out what's gonna happen to the character's life. I did not have that feeling in this book. It almost felt like it was like sarcastic, like some sort of like comical tragedy or something like that. It was just like beyond like weird. It wasn't a bad weird. It was like an interesting weird, something like that you don't really read every day. Like we don't really go deep into the characters' lives because that's not the whole point of the story. I know like a lot of people when they review and when you don't go into like the characters' lives, they automatically don't like it, but you have to like kind of backtrack and see what the main event is in the story. And the main event wasn't like the characters in themselves, it was what was happening in the store. So like I don't care about Amy's life at that point because I care what's gonna happen in the store. You know, I could care less what Amy's personal life is in the story, like who she's dating. Like I don't care about that. Like, you know, it doesn't matter in this context. What matters, what's going on in the store. Is she gonna escape? Are they gonna escape? What's gonna happen? So it's very like plot driven, like there's a lot going on. The characters, like however, talking about the characters again, like they're all like kind of acting like children in a way. Their actions are like kind of super bizarre, and almost like all of them are like very aggressive and always angry. And like honestly, like some parts like I'm telling you like didn't make sense. This didn't make sense because who in their right mind would a supervisor be like, yeah, let's sit in the store and see what's going on like in the middle of the night? Because what if it really is a vandal? Like what are you gonna do? You know, how do you know if they're armed or not? But I guess this is my analytical mindset going into it thinking very analytically about it, when that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to just enjoy the process and read the book. I wish I also read this as a Kindle book, but I read some of the reviews and I saw like myself, like the way that the ebook was, it's kind of like a catalog. So it kind of felt like you were reading like an IKEA, like it wasn't IKEA, but just like an example. I think the store was Orsk. So you're reading like the catalog, you know, so, and they have the layout of the whole store, which is like really cool. I wish I had it as a real book because I felt like it would have been more of an experience rather than just like reading it on a Kindle. This was definitely a good read because especially after you finish something heavy. Like I had read 3 heavy books. This was like the perfect book for me to end that streak, just reset my mindset, clear it all up, and dive back into something more heavier. So it was a very entertaining read, you know, you don't have to like really think about it. You're just sitting there like watching what happens in the characters. So great read for that. I really recommend it if you're just like looking for something entertaining. I do feel like a lot of the answers were left unanswered. A lot of the stuff was left unanswered, like I mentioned before. I don't want to give it away because it's kind of like a spoiler, but yeah, so I would recommend it. Like honestly, it's kind of interesting. I feel like it would be like really cool as a movie actually. Like it would be like super creepy, or like a TV show or something. Yeah. And then the last book that I read this month, it's called Outlawed by Anna North. It also was part of Book of the Month, and it came out this month. So full disclosure, I really thought I was not gonna like this book because on Goodreads it's only rated like about 3.6 stars, so that's kind of lowish, like, you know, kind of like on the lower side for a book when like over 1,000 people rate a book. So I really was like not expecting a lot of it out of it. I thought, oh, it's gonna be something like weird, but honestly, like I actually really enjoyed it, and I gave 4 stars to the book. I never read a Western before, which I thought was like really interesting. The setting, I think, was like somewhere like they talked about like Casper, so I would assume like Casper, Wyoming. Then they talked about the Dakotas, so I think it was somewhere set in like South Dakota. And the main character, Ada, is from Fairchild, so I think that's Wisconsin, but I'm not sure. They never mentioned the state, but it would maybe make sense if she's from Wisconsin. And then like the Dakotas, and then Casper, so it's like all kind of in a similar area. So the reason why I really thought I wasn't gonna like this book, because I kind of read some of the reviews and they were saying that like the book and the story is underdeveloped, it was rushed, they didn't like how the story was told. But again, I guess when you don't expect much, you actually enjoy it. So I really enjoyed the book. And the topics were really interesting. So it talked about, it was like in the late 1800s, like 1894 through 1895, and it talked about how women that don't conceive a child within about a year or two of marriage, they're kind of almost like banished from the kingdom, like you should say. They have to like, they're almost like considered witches or something, or if somebody around them loses a child or the child becomes like ill, they blame you for it if you don't have a child, if you're not able to conceive, and they kind of banish you or put you in jail or hang you for being a witch. With that said, like you already know, I think in the description it talks about Ada and how she wasn't able to have children, and she like tries to figure out why she can't have the kids. It's not like she's just like, oh, okay, I can't have kids. Okay, well, that's how it's gonna be. She wants to learn about it. So to save her, her mother like takes her away, you know, from the town so that she would not be considered a witch and stuff, and like her fate wouldn't just lie in the hands of the sheriff. So she takes her away to this convent, and she's not happy there. She wants to like go to this hospital that's like way out somewhere, Pagosa Springs or something, where she wants to meet the doctor and talk about it, figure out why she can't have any kids, like in a medical sense. I think that's what I really liked about the book, is because Ada is always trying to gain knowledge, like reading books, trying to figure out how to treat something or someone. You know, she has like these good qualities about her. So she becomes an outlaw, you know, living with these other girls in this like ranch or whatever, this like cabin that they have. I think there's like 5 of them, and they all have these like weird names, like Texas, The Kid, News. Like their names are so bizarre, but that's what like I think what made it really interesting. So like of course like they don't really like her at first because, you know, she's the new person, but you know, the relationships and stuff over there with the characters are not really like super emphasized this whole time, and we don't really dive deep into every single character's life story because I feel like that would be like too much. I think what matters here in this book is that we're just focusing on Ada and her life story and what she's trying to do with her life. So kind of like speaking about the ending of the book, I did feel that we were left with a little bit of holes in the ending, and it may have been a little bit too rushed. Kind of like a good to be true kind of story ending, but then again not really, but maybe, like I don't know, it was just like really like kind of cut off, and it didn't really give us a lot of full answers in the story. That's, I feel like, perhaps why the ratings were kind of dropping. But overall, even with the type of ending that this book had, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed just immersing myself in the book, learning about the Wild West, you know. Kind of gave me some vibes of like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like that movie where it was like kind of almost like in the Wild West, but I mean it was in LA, but there were like Wild West vibes and stuff. So it was a really good read, like very enjoyable, definitely like a little bit on the lighter side since it didn't really like dive deep into like super heavy topics. So yeah, definitely check it out. So yeah, so thank you so much for joining me here today for a little bit of talk about books, my little review of my 2021 books. I know this video was quite long, but I hope you enjoy, and I hope you pick up all of the books. I'll list them down in my description just so that you don't have to watch this whole video if you don't want to, you know, to figure out what books I read. And we could also be friends on Goodreads and follow each other. And yeah, so until next time, bye.